BFF show with me, one of your co-hosts, Brendan.
And me, Franco.
Did you forget you were on the show?
I did. I did. You were just so animated, I got a little lost in your eyes.
I right here, beautiful.
Careful, I'm a married
We
man now. You can't
oh,
be
that's true.
moving
Oof,
in.
that's true. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, thank you. On the last show, we talked about heel turns, and when you started your best man speech, because Brendan was my best man, I thought he was making a heel turn in the middle of the speech because it was not a very nice start to the speech. He brought it back around, but you can hear in the video me saying, "Where is he going with this?" and "Why am I the bad guy in my own wedding?" But
Did you like it though? I thought it was funny.
it was really great. Yeah. I mean, it was hard for you to go on after Nathan, the
Oh
curtain
yeah, no,
jerker himself, with the
he
shaky knee and everything else. He really pulled it together.
he did. Yeah, he had a great speech.
I mean, in the realm of people who won, I say the best men killed the bridesmaids,
Yes.
maids of honor, whatever they're called. They didn't do a very good job, so you guys killed it. So let it be said on TV in Monterey: best men win. Double check.
But yeah, no, by far, I was just happy to compliment Nathan's speech because he did a fantastic job.
He was afraid too, but we can move on from this because nobody knows who Nathan is. But yeah,
I like talking about it. This is the BFF show. It's a wide range of topics. But anyway, you're
that's
right. We
true.
should probably move on. So we're gonna do a little bit of a recap on the NFL draft, which we didn't really talk too much about. But we're going to start with sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to start with the Bears because the Bears made a really bizarre move at quarterback and they moved up. So take me through, they moved up to second, correct? From the
Yep.
49ers.
Yeah, so the Bears trade up with the 49ers for second. They gave away, depending on how you look at it, a lot. I mean, it's a second, a third, and then another third, and some other things. But it really depends on how you see Mitch Trubisky. If you think Mitch Trubisky is a guy that's only started 13 games, who hasn't proven anything, and that there are better quarterbacks in the draft, which many people do, it was a very unbalanced trade, and they gave away the house to move up not many picks. Um, if you think he's the future of your franchise and he's a real quarterback, then they didn't give away that much. I mean, look at the RG3 trade that gave away first round picks for a decade or so. Um, so it really all depends on how Trubisky turns out. If he's a bust, then it'll be one of the worst draft trades on draft day ever. If he's a hit, then they got away with the steal. Even compared to last year with Carson Wentz and what the Eagles traded to get him.
And maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the last 5, 6 years, there's been an inordinate amount of speculation on QB picks because you're right. You could have an RG3 style pick where you spend so much on it and it did not pan out, and now you're struggling to figure out what you're doing. And you have other picks that are kind of working out, like Carson Wentz, but I think that's still to be determined because we
Yeah.
need to give him some time. Then you have the Bears. It just seems like I know that the NFL is a quarterback league. We all understand that. We all get that. But I think for me, the question is there's so many other factors to what makes a team successful, and you can get talent in later drafts. And not to beat this example to get to death, but the Patriots are always touted as, well, they got Brady at the end of the draft, and that's true. If you draft successfully, but again, there's no Brady could have easily turned out to have been a bust as well, and then we're having a completely different conversation in 2017 about the Patriots, and they're probably a team that isn't on a run like they have been for the last 15 years or so. So I just think that there seems to be this panic that you have to absolutely get the best quarterback available if you have that opportunity to. And I don't know if teams are necessarily thinking long term, or if, especially in the case of RG3, when you change leadership and all of a sudden that leadership isn't interested in a quarterback that can run and to do option plays, it's more they want more passing. So then you go with a Kirk Cousins, and then you sit RG3 out, or you run RG3 to death, which is what the Washington's been accused of. But I don't get it. Like, I'm trying to figure out why these teams are so terrified, because more often than not, if you're the Browns, great example, you've done this time and time again, and you get nowhere.
Yeah, but you know the other side of that is? It's the Raiders with Carr. It's drafting a quarterback that makes the rest of your pieces work, even without a good receiving core. I mean, they have Amari Cooper, but he's made that team work. A good QB pick can turn around your franchise. Peyton Manning, Colts. I mean, that's what you're always rooting for. I think ultimately It's about knowing when to wait and when not to wait. But QB is the most difficult position to predict. It has the highest bust rate of any of the positions in the NFL. So you're kind of shooting at fish in a barrel. Ultimately, the Bears made that pick because they saw something in Trubisky nobody else saw, and so they believe in him. But the reality is, a bad pick at and early in the draft on a quarterback is fatal. We've seen it with the Browns. We've seen it with
The Raiders,
way
Jamarcus Russell.
Jamarcus Russell, the Raiders. To go way back, the Leach pick, Ryan Leaf pick. It's
Yeah.
dependent on the time. If you nail it, though, you have again Manning for the Colts, and you have Brady for the Patriots. It just really depends on how you land. I think the biggest problem for me with the Trubisky pick is that they just signed Mike Glennon to a huge contract, and they don't know who Mike Glennon is yet. And the next year's draft has a lot better quarterbacks in it, which is why I kind of applaud the Browns, which is something I never think I'd say for the draft. But instead of reaching for a quarterback, they waited. They picked up players they absolutely needed and that would add to their offense and their defense. And then they picked up Deshaun Kaiser in the second round, which is a lower risk pick, with a player that may or may not pan out, but at least they're not betting the farm and missing out on Jabril Peppers and Myles Garrett and those major papers they picked up, and David Njoku, who might be the next Gronkowski. So I think the Browns kind of showed what you should do when you're looking for a quarterback, but it's not there at your pick. And the Bears kind of showed what you shouldn't do, but the jury's out depending on how he turns out ultimately.
But I think, the thing that was, I don't know if you got a chance to read sort of the backstory or behind the scenes of the NFL draft, where John Lynch, the 49ers GM, was basically elated and couldn't believe that the Bears were that hell-bent on getting their quarterback that early when, for all intents and purposes, he probably would have been available still in the second and third round because no one had him on their draft board except for the Bears. But they seemed to, that's, I think, the biggest problem that people had with that move is that it wasn't like anybody else was going to take him, and in the position that they were in, they could have still kept him and grabbed him without having to worry about it. But they seemed to be very paranoid that someone would take him.
I think it's easy to play quarterback on Monday instead of Sunday. Ultimately speaking, he would have made out of the first round. The Texans might have grabbed him. The Browns would have grabbed him if he would have fallen all the way to the late first round. He would have been gone. I think ultimately the way the Browns played their hand early in the draft process, talking about Trubisky at 1, and then talking about basically creating the aura that they're going to trade up above to pick him again, made the Bears play their hand. It may have been a little skittish and reactionary, but that's the talent of their teams in the draft by making them think that he's not going to be there. And I mean, I applaud, again, things you don't say on the draft, and we'll hold our breath until this ends up this year. But the Bears played their hand really well this year and kind of forced the Bears and the Browns played their hand really well here and forced the Browns. Let's try it again. The Browns played really well. That's how unlikely it is that I can't even say the sentence without feeling weird about it. The Browns played their hand really well and forced the Bears into that move. And, I mean, that's good for them, and hopefully this new regime changes things out there.
And you're right. I mean, it could very well change things. We'll see where it goes. But let's talk and bring it down to our teams. And I'll start first with the Raiders, because the Raiders didn't get away with a clean draft in the sense that there's controversy associated, particularly with the round 1 pick, Connolly, cornerback at Ohio State, because right prior to that pick, and excuse me, the draft, there were allegations of sexual assault that came through and that are still, I believe, pending. But he is a talented player, but this is where I struggle with these picks and the general sense that the NFL and the practice the NFL takes with cases like this, which we've covered on the old show in New Paltz quite a bit, but they don't seem to have yet figured out how to make this work. Because if this was a real life job and you're working in an office and you get publicly tagged for sexual assault, it's probably going to be detrimental to your career. It's probably not going to end well. Whereas in professional sports, it doesn't seem to matter unless, in the particular case of Ray Rice, to use that as one example, there is associated footage or audio that, when publicly played, turns the public attention toward your team in a negative way and makes it so negative that you have to do something and that you're forced to do something. There seems to be a very disturbing trend where these issues that come up in college are not really spoken about publicly. It's not mentioned too much on ESPN as a detriment. It's mentioned more as he's a great player. He's got to take care of this thing that happened in college, but he's going to be a great fit for the Raiders. And that's, again, the narrative that's come out of this is where you just got to get through this assault case. And it's like, no, he doesn't have to get through it. I mean, think about the victim in this exchange, and think about the fact that all of this attention is now on this pick and on this player that is ignoring, in many ways, the issues surrounding them to a point where it doesn't even feel like it just feels wrong. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
I think there's the two sides of the coin. The first part is that realistically you're innocent until proven guilty. When the draft came around, that accusation was just made that week, and there was not a lot of research given. And there's been doubt given to that story now, so we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, we're not going to be a legal show and give our personal opinion on it. When he got drafted, the story had just broken. The Raiders did a lot of due diligence and talked to him about it. And in Reggie McKenzie's opinion, there was nothing to the charges, and that's why he was drafted. I think it really depends on how you look at it. And I'll give the better example with Tyler Higbee last year, who got drafted by the Rams. And this is a guy that committed a hate crime, like beat a man to death because he thought he was from the Middle East and thought he was speaking a different language on the phone. Like, the guy lived, but barely, and he'll never be the same. And he was drafted in the third round. Multi-million-dollar contract. On the same note, Dak Prescott got a DUI right before the draft. Mind you, didn't hurt anybody or anything else like that, but ended up falling well past where he was supposed to be drafted into the later or mid-rounds. I think it really depends on who you are and your background and your talent level. On the same note, the NFL isn't a league that cares so much about what you've done. It's what can they prove you've done, and that's where they're at. When Higbee was being drafted, that hate crime charge did not come through, and he wasn't convicted yet. The difference is Dak Prescott, his conviction came through and was proven.
Yeah.
So it's more about what can you avoid and what cannot be tied to your name, and that's more that they care about, and that's kind of disgusting. And we'll talk about it in a minute, actually, with my picks, but I'm okay with Colin being drafted. I think he's a good player. I think I'll hold my reservation until we find out what happens to the case and see if it's real or not. If we see a buyout, I mean, that's concerning. But yeah, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll wait to hear the judgment from the actual law offices before I say bad pick, good pick.
Just to recap, finish recapping the Raiders pick round 2, they went with Melifanu from Connecticut at safety, who seems to be an excellent pick that happened to just be there at pick 56. And even though the safety is not necessarily where the Raiders are struggling, I think you can't argue with that pick, and that was really well received as a second round. They went heavy on defensive tackle for Eddie Vandeross from UCLA, and then they went David Sharp, offensive tackle in Florida by round 4. That they need to figure that out for sure with their not so great running back. They have Marshawn Lynch, but they need a good offensive line behind Marshawn Lynch, and they didn't do that really too well in the past. And then, really, other than that, they didn't really draft a offensive playmaker until round 7 with Elijah Hood, running back in North Carolina. Overall, people seem to be giving them a decent grade, so we'll see how it fares out. So, what about your team, Franco? How did the 49ers do in your case?
I think they did excellent. I'm really excited about it. On a side note, Elijah Hood probably won't make the Raiders roster, to be honest with you, unless he plays special teams really well. So we probably won't see Elijah Hood on the Raiders. He'll probably be assigned somewhere else after the cut period. The 49ers did excellent. I think they had the best draft of the league. I think a lot of people were not sure about John Lynch because how would we know? He's never had any experience in front offices, but I think he hit a home run. Grabbing Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster in the first round is an amazing pickup. Foster does have some questions, but a lot of players have questions in the first round, and we just talked about Connolly. His questions are more his shoulders hurt, and then he got a diluted test, which is something we'll have to deal with. But, again, you have potential rape, maybe smoked pot. I mean, how do you weigh it out? With the NFL's fines and suspensions, it would seem that pot's the worst of those two, but realistically, when you're looking at character of a person, pot's probably the lesser of the two. So I think Foster and Thomas will change the defense to be great pickups. For me, the big pickup I love is Joe Williams in the 4th round from Utah. And this raises a lot of points we just talked about. So if you read that awesome, I forget who wrote it. I think it was on Bleacher Report, maybe not. In the draft room with John Lynch. So Joe Williams was off the board, and John Lynch had to fight for him to get him drafted. And he's an interesting case because he played for Utah, The beginning of last year's college season, he walked away from the team to deal with personal issues with mental health. As it turns out, he was suffering from a bit of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression from his sister dying 10 years earlier and feeling responsible because he wasn't watching her. And so he stepped away, quit on the team. The stars aligned in a very dark kind of way, but every running back on that roster got injured, and he came back, and then for the last 6 games put on a clinic on how to be a running back in college football. Amazing tape, amazing running. And the reason why it's important, one, I think he's an amazing pickup, and two, he's the first pickup of the Shanahan-Lynch, where like Shanahan wanted this player, he's his player, and with Hyde being a running back that's kind of always injured, not that great, I think we'll see Joe Williams a lot on the field. I think he's going to be a big difference maker. The second note is, this is a guy that got pulled off draft boards for a mental health issue. On the same note, Tyler Higbee, hate crime, still on draft boards. Dak Prescott, DUI, still on draft boards. Connolly, rape, still on draft boards. Joe Mixon, caught punching one on tape, still on draft boards. It kind of shows the way the NFL is really not aware of social issues. Yes, he quit on his team technically, but any kind of research would show you it was a mental health issue and that he was taking care of it. And yet that got discounted so much that even the Rams took him off the draft board. So, I mean, good for the 49ers to take the chance. Good for Shanahan to advocate and get him back on the board. But it's really a kind of a sad statement on where the league is in relation to crime and maybe paying attention to social things like mental health. I mean, Brandon Marshall's doing a great job, but outside of Brandon Marshall, it's been kind of a non sequitur.
So I guess the last thing before we tie a bow on the NFL draft is more just sort of the presentation. The NFL draft has become this massive media event and staging event, and I was reading articles, I'm not sure if you did, about how the city of Philadelphia was the locals were struggling with the NFL draft because of road closures. They closed off an entire stretch of block around where they had on the steps of the Philadelphia where they had the actual draft. There were road closures, there were reroutes. It was a big pain for everybody involved, and more often than not, the NFL has struggled with, particularly in your neck of the woods in Santa Clara, where they had the Super Bowl 50, where there's a lot of unpaid bills. There was a lot of promises that you're going to have a huge economic impact. Then the reality is you don't. You end up paying more, and you end up annoying and disrespecting those who live there. I just feel like there are some cities that are already built to manage this, but the NFL is hell-bent on making these places work for their events, where you have a place like New York City, or you have Los Angeles, or you have New Orleans that already has these type of places built. And it bothers me that they always try to crowbar in these events just because they want to try a new city out, or maybe that city's willing to bend over backwards to give them tax incentives to get there and make everything cheap, which is probably also part of the case. But what are your thoughts on sort of the NFL draft becoming this massive event on the scale of when they do the pre-Super Bowl parties and events?
So I'm kind of torn. The first part is, if you watch the draft, the presentation in Philadelphia with the crowd was amazing. Like, they were involved. It's probably the best draft I've ever seen as far as crowd involvement and just excitement level. And the city of Philadelphia knocked it out of the park with the way they presented it. It was pretty impressive, really well done. Again, I think it's the best draft of the modern era as far as the presentation and the excitement around it. I do have a problem with when the reports come out about how they've kind of hurt the city and everything else. But I actually have read a couple of reports that Philadelphia actually gained money on it. So I think as long as the NFL is able to ensure that the businesses around the draft benefit, we'll be okay. I think Philadelphia is a very different city. We saw it with bringing out wrestling, ECW, things like that. So yeah, Philly will support an event like that because they're rabid for anything, fan base, for pretty much any sport. But if we start doing like Chicago, or we do cities that don't have that kind of fan base or infrastructure, I think you're right. I think we'll have a situation where these towns and these citizens are paying the NFL for the right to basically be inconvenienced.
Yeah.
So I think if they stick to centers like you said, New York City, New Orleans, LA, and we've learned that Philadelphia, despite inconvenience, still worked financially, great. They start trying to shoehorn to cities that don't work, and it starts to be like Santa Clara with Super Bowl 50, then it's a bad idea.
So we'll have to see where they go. I don't know. Have they announced where the next year's draft is taking place?
They might have, but I forget.
That's all
I
right.
almost want to say it's Indianapolis, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But
Well, I mean, that is also where the combine is, which again, that's a whole other subject for another
bag of
day.
worms, yeah.
Yeah, but so let's move on. NBA playoffs are happening. Right now, we are in the midst of what many are calling perhaps, depending on, unless you're, I mean, if you're a fan of the Warriors or Cleveland, you love this. You are
Yep.
enjoying what you're seeing. But if you are the rest of the nation, a lot of people are saying this has been an absolute garbage finals in both conferences because the Cavaliers are up 3-0 on the Celtics, and the Celtics, Isaiah Thomas is out for the remainder of the series and the season, quite frankly, even if they were to move on. And they are just being manhandled and destroyed by the Cavaliers. The Golden State Warriors are taking apart the San Antonio Spurs. Kawhi Leonard is out again for the next game, and that is their best player. And they are running guys off their bench that no one's ever heard of to try and compete against a fully rested and healthy Golden State Warrior team. So a lot of people are just kind of waiting for June 1st to roll around when the NBA Finals actually start, so we can perhaps get back into some competitive basketball. But what's your take on the finals in general, Frank? Have you enjoyed it? Obviously, full disclosure, you're a Golden State Warrior fan, so you probably have at least enjoyed it. But as a fan of the NBA, is this in fact the worst conference finals that you've seen?
I mean, I enjoyed the playoffs up to this point. I think there were some questions
Yeah.
early on, like the Wizards and the Celtics series was pretty amazing. That was really exciting. The Spurs series, like that comeback against Houston was pretty incredible. People seem to have like a goldfish memory. They forget like the two rounds before this were pretty incredible, and they expect gold every time. I don't think if you proportion this out against most years, I think the same close games happened. It's just the breakdown's a problem. As a Warriors fan, I have enjoyed seeing it. I mean, I hate the Cavaliers, so I hated seeing that. And the sad part is we'll never really know how these series would have went because, I mean, the Celtics have major injuries. The Spurs lost Kawhi Leonard. We'll never know what these series could have been. I think if Kawhi Leonard was in games, it would be a lot closer. But yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed it to a point, but you're kind of right. I wish the dispersion was a little better. I wish the Celtics could put up a better fight, but they're still a couple years off. I think we're going to see Warriors versus Cavaliers in the finals, and that'll be an excellent series, and that will make everybody forget about the conference finals.
I agree. I think once we get there, I think it's just people are getting antsy to get there. You know, after
Yeah.
seeing the Celtics not come show up, and after seeing the Spurs just get hit with really bad injuries, I think and I'm not a big fan of the NBA, so as a casual fan, I don't really have much interest in watching this, especially when Cavaliers went up. I think it was 71-23 against the Celtics at the end of the first half, with J.R. Smith just making a ridiculous two-pointer shot in order to break that. The reason they were playing so hard was they wanted to break the record of most points
Yep.
scored in a conference finals. Which, when you're at that level of basketball, that means that just let's move on to the finals and skip the game and fast forward like we could in a video game. Let's just skip this part and move on to the finals. But
Simulate.
simulate exactly. So
Yeah, simulate
but
this round.
simulate the finals to get to the conference finals to get to the main finals. But let's go back and talk about the Kawhi Leonard foul. You wanted to bring this up and chat about it because it was perceived by many as a dirty play. And who was the player that fouled him again?
Zaza Pachulia.
Perceived as
Zaza,
a
for
dirty
short,
play.
for you.
Zaza.
Yeah.
And I think, what is your take on that? You saw that play. You saw how it clearly is the play that changed the entire series, where even if you thought there was a hope against the Golden State Warriors, that was immediately squashed with Kawhi going down.
I think I'm on the fence. I don't think it was necessarily a dirty play. If you watch the play, I mean, Zaza's already turned and is going down the court when Leonard lands. He may have boxed out aggressively, but that's not uncommon in the NBA. It's not an uncommon play to get into a shooter's path to alter the shot. It's just the attention was brought because of who got injured and who did it. And that's the biggest problem. I do think it's a little ridiculous for Rick Barry to come out and call it a dirty play because Rick Barry literally made a career out of injuring shooters by doing the exact same thing. And the difference between a Rick Barry play and the Zaza play is that Rick Barry kept his eyes on the shooter and made sure his foot was underneath him when he fell. Zaza was already changing directions when Leonard had fallen. Now, if I would have seen Zaza watching Leonard fall and make sure his foot was there, it'd be a different story, but he'd already changed direction. So I think it's a borderline play at best, but it's one that's not out of order for the NBA now.
So I think we're both in agreement. We're going to see Golden State Warriors Cavaliers 3, right? This is the third time.
Yeah. Third time.
What is your initial prediction?
Warriors in 5. I hope.
Warriors in 5. Okay.
In 5, yeah.
I want to go full 7 games. Warriors win.
All right. I think Kyrie has his foot out the door and wants to get out of Cleveland. That's going to play a big issue. I think one of the exploits that people haven't really touched on with LeBron is he's a terrible free throw shooter. He's 60% or less. It's the only hole in his game. I think, to an extent, Steve Kerr and Mike Brown will exploit that a little more than their teams have. And Kyle Korver, who has shot lights out this entire playoffs, isn't that good of a player. Like, he's not going to keep shooting that well in the finals. So, I think we'll see the holes in the Cavaliers, and I think ultimately the Warriors are just too deep and too much of a rotation to keep the Cavaliers on their feet. So, and revenge is powerful. And I hate LeBron. So, hey, Warriors in 5.
Warriors in 5. Revenge. So, Franco, what did you learn today as we wrap up?
I learned that you have strong opinions about the Raiders draft picks and that you're going to stay a fan despite them abandoning the city of Oakland and moving to Las Vegas. Boo.
What I learned today is that I realize I'm more upset about city planning as it comes to drafts than the actual draft itself. That's where my heart.
Organizer in you, right there.
I can't shut it off. I can't shut it. Well, thank you for watching another edition of the BFF show. I am Brendan.
I'm Franco.
Bye.
Peace.